Hello friends, neighbors, and fellow VEDS. Since I didn't do a 5-minute Friday yesterday like I was going to, I'm going to compensate by doing a 6-minute Saturday today. And the topic of today's 6-minute Saturday is punk music. Why punk music? It's just what was on my mind this morning. So, a while back, my wife was spending some time with her best childhood friend, and they called me at one point and asked me what the difference was between punk and neopunk. And the short answer is that punk is a specific movement from the 70s. It has kind of a general specific punk sound and feel to it. It's the movement associated with smashing instruments and setting things on fire and all that sort of thing. And neopunk is a more modern movement, new punk, and it's basically kind of a blanket term for any music that does not fit nicely into a mainstream genre. That's kind of the short answer. And so in order to really understand the difference between punk and neopunk, we have to talk a little bit about the cycle of popular music and the back and forth between music that is in the mainstream and music that is underground. When music is in the mainstream, that means it's everywhere, it's popular, you hear it on the radio, you hear it when you go to a department store, whatever. It's just a part of the culture. Music that's underground is less well known, it's usually meant for a niche audience, it's not necessarily going to be played on the radio or anything like that, and generally the folks who are making this sort of music want it to stay underground. They don't want to be in the mainstream for whatever reason. So what generally happens is there's a cycle that tends to happen is you've got all this popular music, and there are usually people that don't like it. They think it's boring, they think it's insubstantial, they think it's bland, and so what finally happens is someone finally decides to do something about it, and they decide they're going to make their own music. They're going to make the sort of music that they want to listen to, and by extension the music that their friends want to listen to. So they start up a band, and they play some gigs, and they gain kind of a niche audience, an audience that likes their specific type of music. But what can happen is that popularity can grow. They tell their friends about it. They start getting bigger and bigger venues, and they become more well known. And eventually, they write that one song that becomes a hit of sorts, and so they attract the attention of the mainstream music people, and they approach them with a deal. And they can turn down the deal, and many of them do, but then some of them accept the deal. They say, yeah, sure, I want fame and fortune, and I want to make this into a career, so why not? And so they accept the deal, and they get famous, and everybody knows who they are all of a sudden, and their popularity skyrockets. Their music's being played on the radio, it's everywhere, and yeah, they have a brief little honeymoon period where they're still writing the sort of music that they like because that's what's popular, but they're also enjoying it, and they're making a career out of it, and they're making money off of it, and it's great. But then what eventually starts to happen, they've already become a part of the mainstream machine, even if they're not aware of it, because now they need to keep making that music. Even if they want to change it, they really can't very easily, or at least they're told that they can't very easily, because their sort of music, their genre of music is what people want to hear now. And so their music goes from being popular to being ubiquitous. And the difference is, think of it like this. When music is popular, it's played on the radio. When music is ubiquitous, it gets played at the grocery store. No underground movement really wants to be ubiquitous. Their music is now everywhere, it's now a part of the culture, it's now ingrained in consciousness, people can just listen to it without really listening to it, and they have to keep churning out these songs, and eventually they get frustrated, the band might break up, they just, all the life goes out of the music, and everyone just becomes disillusioned with the whole thing, and so their music now becomes the pop music that nobody likes until somebody decides to do something about it, make their own music, start a band, and the cycle starts all over again. There are many ways to escape this cycle. Many bands have done it, but that's generally the cycle that these sorts of things exist in, going back and forth between underground and mainstream. Underground movements tend to eventually become mainstream genres. So, getting back to punk, the punk movement was one of many of these, but I would not even say that it was necessarily the first of these. In fact, you could probably trace this cycle clear back to Gregorian chant and the secular reaction against it. So as long as music has existed, there's been this back and forth. But punk was specifically called punk because it was so radical and such a departure, but even punk kind of had this sound to it. It had this very specific sort of sound and very specific sort of feel, and I don't want to say it all sounded alike, but it was similar. It was similar enough that they could make a genre out of it, that they could categorize it. With neopunk, though, you don't see that as much. You've got neopunk groups playing in all sorts of different genres, all sorts of different styles. Great example is Panic at the Disco, which is one of my favorite bands, and they've got one album just called Pretty Odd, which is like every song is a different style, every song is a different genre. I actually played this pieces of this album for my kids once, and I asked them, would you believe that these are all from the same album? And they were like, no, of course not, but they are. They're all from the same album, they're all from the same band. And so things like that. People like Hank Green and the Perfect Strangers, who basically got their start on the internet. All 4 members of Hank Green and the Perfect Strangers got their start on the internet playing music that is decidedly not mainstream, that does not fit mainstream genres nicely, and that just doesn't it just doesn't feel like mainstream music. And because of that, I feel like neopunk is probably less likely to become mainstream like punk kind of eventually did. And at this point I got 5 seconds left, so until tomorrow, friends and fellow Vedsies, see you tomorrow.